Now, a lot of students think that studying is all about spending more time reading, maybe highlighting and reviewing their notes over and over and over again all night at the library. And you can get decent results by doing that, except for the all night part if you have unlimited time. But if you want to study faster and actually remember what you learned, because nobody has unlimited time, you need a different approach. Now, this video is about that approach. It's called dual coding, and it's a powerful study strategy that I teach to my private coaching students from high school to grad school. And today I'm going to show you how to use it yourself. Hi there, I'm Katie Azevedo of SchoolHabits.com. I'm a private executive function coach who teaches students and professionals strategies to learn and work smarter. Please let me know you're here by subscribing and liking and leaving a comment or a question. That would be awesome. And in this video, I'm going to teach you a powerful research-backed study strategy that you can use to turn your notes into something that can truly help you study and learn whatever it is that is in your notes. And as I said, it's called dual coding. I'm going to show you exactly what dual coding is, why it works, and most importantly, how to use it in a way that actually makes sense for whatever you're learning. So here's what we're covering in this video: what dual coding is, why it works so well to boost your memory and your understanding, how to actually use it step by step, and tons of examples to show you how it works in real life. So let's start with the basics. What is dual coding? It is a study strategy where you combine words and visuals to learn and remember information better. But don't let the term dual coding, which sounds like kind of like scientific or like computer science, intimidate you, but it's actually really simple and has nothing to do with computer science. So you take the information that you're learning and you represent it in two ways. Words, that is your notes and your definitions and your explanations, the things that you're writing down in text, and then visuals. So that is your diagrams, your sketches, timelines, charts, graphics, anything that is not words. Now, I am going to share a lot more examples further in this video, but here's a super basic example of dual coding just to illustrate this concept so that you understand it at the beginning of this video so that the rest of the strategies make sense. So we'll talk about more examples as this goes, but follow me here. Let's say you're learning about the water cycle. Okay, you could write out each stage, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and collection in your notes. But then right next to that or below that or somewhere in your notes, you'd also create a simple diagram showing the water moving through those stages. That's dual coding. Now, another example, if you're learning vocabulary, like the word is derelict, okay, that's your vocab word. You could write the word and its definition. It means run down and in really bad condition because of neglect. That's the text part, but you could also add a small, simple sketch of what that word means. I don't know, maybe like a broken house. But dual coding isn't just for basic concepts. It works for complex concepts too. So let's say that you are studying cellular respiration in bio class. This is a complex process with multiple stages. There's glycolysis, there's the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain. Try to remember my high school bio. You would explain this in words, and then you would pair that with a diagram. So for the text-based notes, you'd write out the key stages of cellular respiration, along with maybe a brief description of what happens in each stage. All right, so that'd be like glycolysis. It breaks down glucose into two molecules of pyruvate, producing a small amount of ATP. And then you would write down the Krebs cycle. So takes pyruvate and produces more energy molecules like NADH and FADH2, whatever, like super science. You didn't have to follow any of that, but that's an example of what you would write in your notes. And then for the visual representation, next to your notes, you would create a labeled diagram that shows how glucose is broken down, how it moves through each stage, and how the energy molecules are produced. You could use arrows to show the flow of energy. You could use symbols to show where ATP is produced. You could use color coding, maybe green for glucose, like whatever. By seeing the text explanation right next to the visual, your brain gets two ways to remember the same information. So even if you forget the written steps, you forget the text version of it, you might still remember the visual diagram of the energy flowing from one stage to the next. And then if you forget the image, you might actually still remember the key terms and descriptions that you were really careful and thorough to write out. So why does dual coding actually work? It's because our brain has two main pathways for processing information: a verbal pathway, which deals with words, and a visual pathway, which deals with images. And when we use both pathways at the same time, our brain creates stronger connections. Definitely, all of the neuroscientists in the world are probably rolling their eyes at that explanation and saying, well, like, hold up, there is way more to how our brains process information than what I just said. And yes, that is true. But at the most basic level, and to the extent that you need to understand the neuroscience behind this strategy, that's a sufficient explanation, okay? So don't come for me if you're a neuroscientist, all right? But think of it like, this is another way to think of it. You could think of it like two roads, right? Leading to the same destination. If one road is blocked, you still have another way to get there. Or maybe a better way to think of it is if a bucket is full of water and you're trying not to drop any of it. If you hold it just by one handle and it becomes lopsided, a bunch of water is probably gonna spill out. But if you hold it by both handles, it's gonna be steady and even and you're not gonna drop the water. So the more ways that you have to store information, the more handles you have on it, so to speak. And then the more solid our grasp of that information will be. All right, so let's get to the practical stuff. How do you actually use dual coding to study? Now, there's no one right way to implement this strategy, and it really does depend on what level of classes you're taking, maybe the content you're learning, your own personal preferences for taking notes in the first place. Your own personal preferences always matter here, so take everything I say with a grain of salt, all right? I have a video describing the pros and cons of taking digital notes versus paper notes. And one of the advantages, I'll leave that linked below. One of the advantages of taking notes by hand is it can be really helpful for dual coding. Again, I'll leave that in the description box. But as I was saying, dual coding can look different, even for the same student, just depending on what class you're in and maybe how the teacher is delivering the content. So for example, you might find that you take your text-based notes during class and you are so focused on writing down the right information and not missing things that you don't have time to add any diagrams or visuals because you're barely writing down enough words in the first place because the professor's like talking so fast. In that case, you'd get all your text-based notes down first during class and you'd add your visuals at a later point. Or maybe for different classes, maybe the one's a little slower paced, you might be able to write your notes and add a super basic visual during your class period. It honestly depends. But regardless, here's how to use dual coding to study. First, start with your text-based notes. So this could be your class notes, textbook, a study guide that was given to you, but we're just talking words. You have a notebook or a Google Doc full of notes somewhere and you're ready to do something with those notes to study for an upcoming test. Next, identify the key concepts or terms that you need to know. This is important because we do not want to turn everything into a visual, okay? We're only going to focus on the most important ideas. It is not at all a helpful study technique to force yourself to turn every idea from your notes into a picture. That's not what I'm suggesting because that would actually be harmful. Some concepts and material lend themselves better to visuals than others, and only you can be the judge of that. But I will say that the more you do dual coding, the more you'll be able to think outside the box in terms of what can be turned into a visual, but just don't force it. All right, third, do the dual coding. Create a visual representation for each concept. This could be a labeled diagram, a flow chart that shows a process, a timeline for historical events, maybe a symbol or a sketch or an icon that you've developed, a cause and effect graphic. There's a lot of options. Don't hold back on your creativity. Don't judge what comes to mind. You know, one strategy that might be helpful as you're just getting started is to do a Google image search for the concepts that you're learning, and then maybe you get inspired by the images you see. They might give you just enough inspiration so that you can generate something on your own. And lastly, you want to make sure that your visuals are directly connected to your notes. We don't just draw random pictures. They should actually represent the concepts that you wrote down in your notes. Using dual coding as a study strategy just because you're watching this video or you heard it works, but not actually thinking, like really thinking about the images that you're creating is pointless. The visuals you create have to work for the type of brain that you have, and they have to align with and represent the information that you have written in words. Okay, I promised you a lot of examples at the top of this video, and I'm going to deliver that right now. So here we go. Here are some examples of how you can use dual coding in different subjects. In biology, if you're studying the human heart, you could write out the function of each chamber. That's the text, but you'd also draw a simple labeled diagram of the heart showing the direction of the blood flow. In history, if you're studying the American Revolution, you could write out the key events, but then you could also create a timeline with sketches of major battles, key figures, or important treaties. Maybe for calculus, you could write out the steps to solve a type of problem, but next to it, you could draw a graph that visually represents the function that you are solving. Psychology, if you're learning about Pavlov's classical conditioning, you could write the text definition, but then next to it, you could draw a simple diagram showing a bell, a dog, and a bowl of food with arrows showing how the bell becomes associated with the food. For econ, if you're studying supply and demand, you could write the definitions of the two terms, but also draw a graph showing how they intersect and what happens when one curve shifts. Philosophy. If you're studying Plato's allegory in the cave, you could write out the text summary of the story, but then draw a simple diagram showing the cave, the prisoners, the shadows, and the outside world, making the abstract concept much more concrete. Now, I know these examples are pretty basic, and many of you watching this video have more complicated material, but dual coding can still work for college native curriculum. Remember what I said earlier, don't force it. Not every concept you wrote in your notes needs to be put into a picture. But with that said, I challenge you to think outside the box and look at some of your complex material and ask yourself, how could I make a visual out of this? And it's this actual thinking about the material, this actual coming at it from a different angle, this brainstorming process that helps us better understand the concept before we've even created the visual. And then of course, when we create the visual, it all comes together. Now, no study tip video of mine would ever be complete without mentioning active recall, and that's because there is no study method that works better than active recall study methods. So dual coding is a terrific way to study because it taps into active recall, and it taps into active recall in a couple different ways, depending on how you use it. So first of all, you could integrate dual coding and active recall when you're first creating your visuals. So you would look at what's in your notes, and then you would look away from your notes, and without consulting any other references or resources, you would try from memory to create a visual of what was in your notes. And as long as you're not peeking at your resources, that is active recall. Alternatively, you could go through the whole dual coding process from top to bottom, turning a full unit of notes, or maybe just like a page of notes, into images. And then you could use active recall in a kind of like flashcard manner by showing yourself the images and asking yourself to generate the words that go with it. Or you can do the reverse. You can read the notes of the words and integrate active recall by asking yourself to generate the visuals without looking at your notes. Either way would work. So my final message here is one that I really want to come through all of my School Habits videos, and that's that you have to be the scientist and the experiment. And it's on you to honestly assess what you're currently doing and ask yourself, is what I'm doing working? Could there be a better way to learn this material? Usually the answer is yes. To the second question. So if that's true, you have to try a new strategy, and dual coding can be the next thing that you try. Branching out and trying new study methods can also help with feeling bored in school and feeling bored with like flashcards and Quizlet. Like those get really old after a while, especially Quizlet. The more study strategies you learn, the more variety you have and the more interesting your study sessions can be. Inside SchoolHabits University, my online self-paced course for high school, college, and graduate students, I teach a ton of different study strategies for different kinds of material. If you're bored with or what you're currently doing is not working, it's time to shake things up. And join me and all the other students inside SchoolHabits University, which is linked below. If you found this video helpful, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, just so that I know that you're here and that you're watching. As always, thank you for your time, thank you for your support, and thank you for watching.